Of course. No,
Okay.
you do.
Ooh. That's hot. It's a little hot. Okay, talk. Okay, there.
Sandra, mic check.
Mic check, can you hear me?
Yes. Keep talking.
Okay, I'm looking for the Facebook. It's at valleycentral.com, right? Why is it not coming up?
Okay, we're
Well,
good.
CBS for like
CBS.
Facebook or KBO.
CBS.
Hi everyone, happy Thursday. Samantha Mesa here at our digital desk. I hope you're all having a great day. We have a lot to cover today, so I'm hopping on here to bring you some in-depth breakdown of a lot of, Texas is making national news. We all heard the news this week, a lot happening with the mask mandates to be removed. And also because of immigrants being released by Border Patrol in South Texas, we have more information on over 100 migrants that have tested positive for COVID-19. Our expert, who has been incredible on updating us, breaking down all of the happenings on the border, Sandra Sanchez, joining me today. Sandra, it's great to reconnect. We started this about a week ago, and it was a very different conversation then. Immigrants from the MPP protocol were starting to be released, started 27 folks coming in that first batch and went up into the hundreds by the days. So we've been tracking that, and you gave us great context on those beginning days. Things have changed a lot. So can you just update us on what you're following right now?
Well, thanks for having me back, Samantha. Always a pleasure. Yes, we've been talking about the migrants in the Migrant Protection Protocols program, and they have almost all crossed from the camp in Matamoros, Mexico. But what's making news now is the fact that hundreds, in fact thousands of family units of migrants traveling with what's called tender age children are being released in the Rio Grande Valley by DHS officials, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials, and they are traveling north. And we learned yesterday that 108 of the migrants had tested positive in Brownsville for coronavirus. Felipe Romero, who is spokesman for the city of Brownsville, told me yesterday that all the migrants who end up at the bus station in downtown Brownsville are tested. And when they were found to have COVID, it was suggested to them to quarantine, that there are several nonprofit groups that will help put them up in hotels. And I have learned that 2 families did quarantine for a few nights, but I have not gotten data on exactly what happened to everyone else, and that's caused a big conflict after Governor Abbott learned this information and began tweeting about it yesterday.
What do you make of that? Last week we were discussing how officials told reporters that nobody's going to get on a bus and cross over if they've tested positive for COVID. So we were told, if they get COVID, it would likely be from someone in the U.S. So what do we make of this right now?
Right, a lot of conflicting information. As we know, the MPPs do not have COVID, not one of them. They are clean from COVID. And then on Monday, the new Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas told media during a White House briefing in Washington, D.C., no one is crossing because of Title 42, the border restrictions, which are still in effect. But that's not true. In South Texas, people are being released. Part of that has to do with the mass number of people who are coming to the border and who are crossing the Rio Grande and who are being apprehended. A lot of these people live are ending up in the Mcallen and Mission area, and they are being released to this area. But also there are several people who are coming across from Matamoros into the Brownsville area, and they're released there.
What are you seeing at the bus station?
Yeah, today I went to the bus station, a very different scene. Last week we watched as all the MPPs came in and there was all this jubilation. Today the MPPs are coming in and they're being kept at a different facility altogether. They are not even visible. And part of that, I think, is to keep quarantining them because they are free from COVID. The people I saw today are the ones that were just released by CBP officials, and they are in the same position, in the same spot, outdoor area, where the MPPs had been last week. None of them were talking to me. And healthcare workers were also very mum. It was a very different scene. And they told me these are the people who had just been apprehended and released.
And with that, what are city officials telling you on all of this?
Well, the city of Brownsville, as you know, received 10,000 COVID-19 test kits from Governor Abbott. And this followed after a request from the city of Mcallen, which also received 10,000 COVID tests. So today, late this afternoon, right before we got on the air, Governor Abbott tweeted, you know, how dare the Biden administration ask Texas for resources. But in actuality, Texas has sent 20,000 COVID test kits at least from the Texas Division of Emergency Management to help the situation.
On that, you had mentioned too, in Mcallen, the majority of Mcallen, they're not crossing in Brownsville, and less than 2% testing positive.
If you do the math, there were about 6,500 people who had been apprehended, and only 108 that we know of tested positive. So that is a very small percentage that we're learning. We're still trying to dig into the data. The Border Patrol today released some figures, but their numbers are always about a month behind, so we still don't have February numbers.
Okay. And on the politics side, so Governor Abbott is criticizing President Biden's decision to release immigrants, and he tweeted, "We're following this hour by hour through the day." So when I'm looking down, I'm looking at notes, following a lot of movement. There's a lot of things changing as the days go by. So I'm going to quote Governor Abbott. He said, "My statement about the Biden administration's assimilating COVID-positive illegal immigrants in states across the country." He says the unconscionable act by the Biden administration of releasing COVID-positive in our state puts the lives of Texans and Americans at risk. Border security is strictly a federal responsibility, and the federal government alone has the responsibility to test, screen, and quarantine illegal immigrants crossing our border who may have COVID. Instead of doing their job, the Biden administration suggested it did not have the sufficient resources and remarkably asked Texas to assist them in aiding their illegal immigration program. Now, to wrap that, he says Texas refused. "We will not aid a program that makes our country a magnet for illegal immigration." Can you just break this down? What does this all mean?
Like I mentioned, it's not necessarily 100% true because he did send a total of 20,000 test kits, 10,000 to Mcallen and 10,000 to Brownsville. So the state of Texas has assisted in this situation. As far as looking forward down the road, I have been told by Sister Norma Pimentel of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley that she has learned that FEMA is planning to reimburse them. They should be receiving some funding for all the housing and the test kits and all the stuff that they're doing for the migrants at their downtown humanitarian respite center, as well as the bus stop in Brownsville. So I think that there will be some federal resources. As for Governor Abbott's statement regarding the tests, CBP officials said to me they do not have the resources to test everyone that they are apprehending. The last time we had a surge like this was not a pandemic.
Correct.
This is a game changer for them, right? So they are only testing those who show symptoms, and then they're referring them either to a healthcare professional locally or a hospital for testing, depending what they see. The pandemic is also limiting the way Border Patrol can physically apprehend people. You know, they have to maintain more distance and spacing in between the number as the migrants come in. They can't just have 3 people. They can't touch their touch their hands. There's all sorts of personal protective requirements that they're implementing. Congressman Henry Cuellar represents South Texas. What we're looking at right now is some video that I shot today at the bus stop. All of these migrants have been released by U.S. Border Patrol today. They are just appearing. And you can see a healthcare worker in the background there on that shot who was preparing to start with some of the COVID tests. Team Brownsville provides for them blankets and food and whatever that they might need. And they have a similar setup like this for the MPPs, as I mentioned, in an entirely different location. So they're keeping them completely separated. But this is the scene this afternoon. You can see the healthcare workers. They're gloved and they're, masked and they are testing people. But if people do show to have coronavirus, as the city said, we can't stop them from getting on the bus.
Right. And we had talked about that right when this first started. The protocol was to be everyone gets tested and no one goes on a bus unless they test negative, because there's consequences to that. If someone comes through and they're very sick, just as we here in the U.S. are doing, you have to isolate. And what level of isolation does that need to be? Officials were considering, do we put people in hotels and let them wait out the sickness there? Or if they're very sick, who's going to pay for putting them in hospitals? And we were having this conversation with the city of Mcallen. It was 2014 to a few years, maybe 2017, 2019, that it cost over $1 million in handling transportation, housing, food, the necessities of getting people across the border. Who fronts that bill? And I believe we were reported it was around $140,000, $150,000 that the city had been compensated. And Sister Norma had said, we expect more in the future, FEMA stepping in.
Yeah, Sister Norma's organization got over $500,000, but we're talking 4 years worth of service that they provided. Same as the city, they were out well over $1 million. Yes, they are asking the federal government to be quicker in refunding it going forward. As for the testing, I believe that DHS and the Mexican government agreed with the MPPs. This is how we're going to do it. And so this way Mexico can't be blamed for having anyone enter the country with coronavirus. I don't know if they thought forward, what are we going to do with those others that are apprehended in the brush who are coming across? Certainly the United States is not blaming Mexico right now, but Abbott is blaming Joe Biden and his administration. Congressman Henry Cuellar, he's Vice Chairman of the House Homeland Security Subcommittee for Appropriations, which controls the money, basically said Washington doesn't really understand what's going on down here. And I think that's evident by what Secretary Mayorkas this week said, that nobody's getting released who's crossing. That's not true. Now, we all know also that 2 giant tent facilities were erected, one in Donna, Texas, right? And so we are expecting to hear that several of the migrants could be detained there. Perhaps that is where they are taking single adults, because we know that they are not releasing single adults, only those with tender age children.
It's a lot to follow.
It is a lot to follow. It's a lot to wrap your head around. And one thing I have noticed is, not everyone's getting it right. I really want to stress and emphasize these are 2 completely different groups of migrants coming across. Some media yesterday lumped them together, and they're not the same. So the MPPs are almost all crossed from Matamoros. The camp is dissolved, and now what we're looking at are migrants who have just made the trek from the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and they're crossing, some have told me, on riding old tires across the Rio Grande, and they're basically giving themselves up in the brush.
And those are very dangerous circumstances.
It is, especially with these very young children. I was reading some press releases from Border Patrol saying how there was a raft that deflated, and there was a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 9-year-old on the raft. So, Border Patrol went in and rescued them.
Kids.
Very, very young children.
And if Border Patrol doesn't step in, what's to happen to them,
Right.
Think of the what ifs. A lot of moving parts. We have quite a few questions coming in. And we want to just remind folks, for those of you who are asking questions, we can take them in real time and answer them while we're talking. Let's see. Rosan, you say, why allow them in? Not a good time to allow this to happen. Valid. We're in a pandemic. We're into a new administration. So there's a lot of moving parts and very extreme. These are no simple changes happening. El Paso, we reported they have kiosks where people are trying to navigate the legal system on a kiosk, and those had a lot of technical issues. San Diego was the first to pretty much test out a new process. And we have to think we were in a migrant crisis before the pandemic, and it was a very challenging situation with it just as it is.
Well, and to answer that question, I'm assuming that Rosa is asking the question about the migrants who are being released, not the MPPs. The reason I've been told is that U.S. Customs and Border Protection simply doesn't have the appropriate space to hold them right now during the pandemic with social distancing requirements. And then there's one other aspect that just adds a whole wrinkle to this, and that is the fact that on January 6th, Mexico implemented a new law that forbids the detention of very young children. And this is what ties the tender age children together with the release of families with tender age children. Part of this is because there is an institution, it's similar to CPS, Child Protective Services.
Sure.
It's Desarrollo Integral de Familia in Mexico. And it's called DIF for short, in the state of Tamaulipas, apparently is having a lot of problems. I interviewed earlier this week a leader with Doctors Without Borders, and he is there on the ground, and he said that the DIF facilities in Tamaulipas aren't adequate to hold the children, and the government of Tamaulipas said, we're not going to accept the families with young children because we have nowhere to put them. That's, I believe, the root problem to all of this. That's what started this.
And I want to take a question from a viewer right now. We had mentioned this briefly. Who pays for hotels for immigrants? Let's just break that down, the finances behind this. Who pays for all of this?
Team Brownsville, Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley have accepted donations, and they use them for anyone who needs to stay. This is anyone who tests positive is being told, look, we'll put you up in a hotel for 2 weeks. I don't expect that they're put up at the Ritz, but they are provided for with meals and safe accommodations.
And then if someone is severely ill, the hospital stay, who pays for that?
You have me there. I suppose the hospital will have to work out that bill. All the migrants are supposed to give a location, a person, a contact, a sponsor for wherever they're going in the United States. So I suppose that hospital bill will find them.
Sure. Yeah, a lot to navigate. It's a complex situation. Sandra, as we move forward, what are you focusing in on right now? There's so many moving parts. What's something you're digging into today?
Well, today I've reported on what's going on as far as this back and forth between Austin and Washington, D.C. that just gets getting more and more heated. And basically the migrants in South Texas that are kind of caught in the middle. We as a region are being badmouthed in the national media right now. So I think it's important, and thank you all for tuning in and further understanding the story, because the RGV is being talked about a lot right now.
Right.
Next week I'd like to look into some of these tent cities that are that have been erected in the city of Donna in the area, and what they're actually doing there, who they're holding there.
Sure.
If they're supposedly releasing everyone who's not with a tender age child, then why do we have these big facilities? What are they used for?
A good question. In news, you know, we can predict in some ways, you know, forecast, if you will, what is to happen with a lot of the stories that we develop, because it's sort of actions and consequences. And this is going to a whole new level, though. There's the way we're watching politicians make decisions in this area. There are surprising decisions being made and policies putting into place, and I know it's kept you very busy. What has this been like for you? You know, I feel like we're having a totally different conversation than last week, and we certainly did not expect things to turn the way they did.
We are, you know, it's funny, one woman once who runs the resource center in Matamoros, who has helped the migrants, told me that one day in Matamoros, did we lose for a second?
Say that one more time. Yeah.
The resource center director told me that one day in Matamoros is the equivalent of a week living elsewhere, because things just move so fast on the border and evolve so quickly, and certainly that's what we're seeing. But I think what's really important going forward here, and Congressman Cuellar said it, is there is a disconnect between what's happening here and what Washington knows, hears, or is acknowledging. So perhaps Secretary Mayorkas needs to come down to the border and he needs to visit and he needs to find out exactly what's going on before he stands up in Washington and says people aren't being released when we know that they are. Perhaps additional congressional delegations will start coming. So, I think that's the next phase of this. And I think that'll be really important. Cuellar said today, I really hope that the White House understands fully what's happening and the consequences to the communities on the border. So it's really not the local level that's making these decisions. These are federal mandates. These are decisions that's coming from DHS. These are decisions that are coming from Washington. So, keeping in mind the protection and the safety and the health of the Border Patrol agents, as well as the community here, as well as, anyone just riding on a bus beside somebody, I think that a little bit more fact-finding is necessary. And I suspect that we're going to hear a little bit more about this from Washington in the days to come.
And that's why we're here, is to be the eyes and ears on the ground and to give context and show what it is really like, because you can form your own opinions or be misinformed, if you don't truly understand what's going on. So I think, today maybe you can invite him informally here on Facebook.
Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, please come down to the Rio Grande Valley. We really want to see you.
It's critical.
And I'd like an interview if you come.
We got to unpack these things in the smoothest way possible and the most informed, and making the decisions that are the most strategic and smartest way for everyone. So it is a complex situation. Sandra, thank you so much for breaking this down. A lot to unpack today, and certainly as the days go by, as you said it, things can get more complex than what we even see today. Hard to believe, but in today's world, we're navigating very big factors: pandemic, new administration, migrant crisis. So a lot of moving parts, and you break it down very smooth. We've had quite a few people comment, and we want to thank you for your comments. It helps us to work for you better, answering your questions in real time. We're going to have this interview on valleycentral.com. And in the meantime, Sandra, I know you got a lot of work to do. Get to it, and I'm going to work on my own reports for our 10 o'clock show. Everyone have a great Thursday.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it. We'll see you.